Hello, my name is Adam, and I run a game development studio called BetaJester. So, I started making games about 10 years ago. So I went into a university course which was focused on programming, learning how to program, computer science, so learning more about computers than anything else. And the first piece of coursework was sort of centered around you could either make a very boring business application or make a game, which at the time was an equivalent of Snakes and Ladders, but using only text. So you would sort of say, oh, you rolled a 6, you rolled a 2, and you moved 2 places, now you're at square 15 or whatever it might be. And up to that point, I had not, I'd played a lot of video games, but I hadn't really considered the ability to make them. I'd always been told that, this is something that hyper-competitive people do, or people who are, the most experienced or talented or whatever it might be, and it's just an impossible goal. And only really after making this first game did I realize that, oh, this is what making a game looks like, and I realized that it was something that I could do. So games design is the idea that everything in a game has to have some level of design to it to be fun and enjoyable. The idea that a game is not just a bunch of random things put in place, it's about how you use those things to create something that is fun and engaging and has depth to it. Classically, this comes up with something that was described as the door problem. If you see a door in a video game, every question that comes from that door is part of games design. Is that door locked? Is it unlocked? Which way does it swing? Is it made of wood? Is it made of metal? What happens when an enemy approaches it? Can an enemy go through the door? Can you go through the door? Does it lead to another level, to a corridor, outside? All these kind of questions are game design questions because they affect the design of the game. And all of them are important because, at some point someone is going to come across that problem and they need that question to have been answered. An enemy is going to come up to it, and then if you haven't told it if it can or can't go through, it's probably just going to walk through the door. That's even if it's closed and locked, and then that breaks the game. And that's where games design come in. It's coming up with the problems that are going to occur within your games design. Games design comes up all the time. It is probably one of the core elements, and something that it is a skill that you do pick up over time. And it's important that you do because you want to be able to sort of almost subconsciously think about these things. You want to be able to look at a game or a problem and sort of consider the solutions around it. What do you need to take into account? What's important in this situation? And even when you're talking about very simple games, take Tic-Tac-Toe or Connect 4 or any of those kind of games. Something that's very straightforward. The games design in that is that it may feel like how can there be game design in something like say Connect 4, but from every element, the colors that you choose in that particular game, the fact that it's got the different tactics, the diagonals and the straights, the choice to allow diagonals as well as verticals and horizontals, that is a games design decision. It's going, yes, this is valid and part of the rules. And that is, imagine Connect 4 without being able to score diagonals, how difficult that would be. Games design comes up in basically any time there's a game. So game theory takes a slightly different approach in that it is more looking at the people who are playing the game as decision makers, potentially as rational actors, but it's more about the fact that the people who play your game will influence it. So this comes up in typically as something called the prisoner's dilemma, which is basically the dilemma is you and a friend of yours are arrested for committing a crime. You are separated and interrogated separately. They come to you and say they have not. So the prosecutors basically realise they don't have enough evidence to convict you both of a serious crime, but they can convict both of you of a minor crime. So they come to you and say, we're going to give you 1 year, 2 years in prison, or if you tell us that we'll give you 1 year, we'll give you 1 year in prison. Or if you tell us that the other person did it, we'll set you free. But if you both grass on each other, then we'll give you both 2 years. And if you stay silent and that person tells on you, then you get 3 years and they get no years. And so it's this idea of, do you cooperate and both take 1 year and go less? Do you tell on the other person and try and get yourself free, but send them down. And how do you do that when you don't know what the other person is going to do? And the idea of trying to think about each of the situations, both as a objectively and subjectively. The idea that in that situation, then you're going to get slightly better if you do tell a person, because it's either 0 years or 2 years, as opposed to if you don't tell them when you can get 1 year or 3 years. But that does take into account the subjective things, the fact that you may have a relationship with that person, or you may know that person better and trust in their ability to do things, and the emotions that come into it. And game theory basically expands out into how you look at this problem and sort of figure out what will people do in a scenario. So when it comes to game theory and game design, obviously a game is both a tool that is going to be played with, and a person who is going to be the person playing it in the first place. So the two of these sort of line up with each other in so much as you've got to figure out how do you want your game to be played, and how is it going to be played. So if you think about it in terms of, say, a car, right? You can build a very nice car, but it's also important to think about how that person is going to then utilize the car. Are they going to be, where are they going to sit? What are they going to do? And what happens if there's 2 people in the car? How does that affect things? And making sure that you pair up the game theory and the game design, the way that the game is built, and you've thought about it and designed it, plus also how it is going to be played, how people working together in that game, how people working against each other in that game looks like, and making sure that the two line up together to make something that is fun and interesting is really important. So in terms of developing, it really comes into both kind of areas. It's important that you do a lot of things that basically just give you experience in those areas. So this could be things such as game jams, where you could make a game in a very short period of time, 24, 48 hours. These are always fantastic for developing your games design and game theory skills. They basically give you a short opportunity to build something. And really that's the key here, is that to gain experience in game design, game theory, it's experimenting, playing around, building games, trying things out, seeing what works ultimately. You can also read, there's lots of resources, lots of books out there. The Joy of Fun is particularly good. The idea that games design is available in many places, people write blogs on it. You can obviously check out the Game Dev London podcast, because we talk about games design all the time, from lots of different perspectives, from physical games to board games to video games and everything in between. So I definitely recommend checking that out. Other podcasts as well. Essentially, you can get a lot from listening to people, from reading about it, etc. But certainly the best way to gain experience in both of those areas is to take part in game jams, or make games in general. Most of these resources are available online. You can find game jams either via the Game Jam calendar, which you can just Google. I think it's gamejamcalendar.com, but Google it, just double check. itch.io hosts hundreds of game jams per year, and you can find all those on the website on the jams page. They'll tell you where they are. You can also take part in bigger competitions. So there is itch.io hosts their own game jams. You've got Global Game Jam, which is a massive competition every year. You can take part in Ludum Dare, which is also a big competition that takes place twice a year. And you can also just sit and make a game. Just take some time for yourself. Go, this week I'm going to make this week I'm going to make that. Test out some mechanics, just try things, see what comes up. There's also YouTubers you can go and find. Game Maker's Toolkit is a really good one for games design. And if you want the Game Dev London podcast, you can find that via gamedev.london. It's also available in all good sort of podcast places, Spotify, Pocket Cast, all those kinds of things as well. It was, but that's not really what I set out to do. So I set out to do a computer science degree because I was interested in learning how to program. I was interested in computers. I was interested in learning how they work. And I started with there as a basis, and games sort of came in after I began, and I realized it was an option. I knew from the beginning it was there, but it was never going to be my focus, because I wanted to learn programming as a sort of a fundamental skill. And I did take up the gaming mantle as I went through my course. But I think had I just learned pure programming and done gaming on the side, that also would have worked. So I think it depends on what you want to come out with. I would say fundamental skills are more important than directly learning about gaming. But that doesn't stop you from doing a gaming course. It just, I would say, make sure that the course is going to teach you the fundamentals that you want to know about. Absolutely. I mean, particularly before I went to university, it was something that I sort of considered impossible. Something that I thought I cannot get into this market. It's just not possible. And so I was put off by it 100%. And really, I've kind of cheated my way around because I built my own studio and didn't really get. I worked very briefly for an internship with a company, sort of online only, unpaid. But other than that, I've not worked for anybody else. I've just worked for my own studio, and I know from a fact, there's been surveys recently that it is a incredibly competitive market. But that being said, there are ways around that. There are events where people attend. You can network. You can talk to people. You can find out more about the industry and the individuals in it and where the jobs are, and that will give you sort of an advantage. So it is a really competitive market, but there are ways around that, as you would expect. I don't think there were many by way of ups and downs. Certainly some areas were considerably harder than other spaces, which is natural. You're going to be better at certain things than others. So, for example, I'm much better sort of mechanics and AI programmer than I am a database programmer, because AI and mechanics is a lot more fun, to be honest. And that is going to be part and parcel of the situation. You are going to find things that you enjoy more and enjoy less. But the important thing is that no part of it should be putting you off doing them. You should be trying to find a way to make things interesting. Yes, databases are boring, but they're also the basis of things like inventory systems and leaderboards and all this kind of thing. So finding a framing which makes it seem more interesting or relevant is key to helping you sort of feel like it's something you want to do. I'm not sure there was much by way of being unexpected. I think we thought it would be easier initially than it turned out to be. And that was because we were relying on people that we thought, that we thought were going to help us find work. And really, they were just sort of saying, oh, we'll be around generally. And so we thought it was a lot more kind of, oh, and the work will appear and it will be fine. When from our perspective, because we were a contract company, really it was difficult to find work at all, especially initially. Certainly also from the games perspective, we thought that we would just get funding or just get a publisher and it'll be fine, and that is just so significantly harder than we thought it was going to be. And it's not something that we've managed to do yet. I mean, we've got grant funding, but we haven't had a publisher support, for example. So going into it with open eyes, going, this is going to be difficult, is important. Oh, completely. Essentially, I have found the industry and the space that I'm going to remain in because I love games. I love the creativity that's involved. I love being able to create things. I love it's a meeting of science and arts, and both of which I'm passionate about. So it's perfect for me. I love being able to create something from nothing. I love being able to build, have an idea in my head and know how to turn that into a game that I can play on my PC or on my phone or whatever it might be. And there's not a lot of other industries, almost none, where you can be that kind of free. TV and film, sure, you can make the thing that you're thinking of, but you can't play it, you can't be involved in it. And likewise in science, you can't, if you're a software programmer, it's fine, but you can't make something that is fun and creative most of the time. You're making very boring things. So yeah, my passion comes from the fact that I just love being creative and creating things. Practice. Absolutely practice. Just make games, make small things, make big games, play around with mechanics, do tutorials. The more you can just experiment with ideas and ways of doing things, the better you will become over time. Ultimately, you should be trying to avoid crunch, and that involves a strict amount of management, working around deadlines, planning work in advance, sticking rigidly to that plan as best you can. Inevitably, crunch does happen here and there, and when it does, you need to take it with as light a touch as possible. You want to be crunching for as little time as possible. For me, it's important to try and, if you are going to have to crunch, to try and stretch it out, as in, say you recognize you've got 2 weeks left and not a lot of time, trying to do a little bit each day, not all of it on one day, is important. It's much easier to do 10 8-hour days than it is to do 9 7-hour days and one 16-hour day or whatever it might be. So definitely trying to stretch it out even in crunch time as much as possible, and definitely when you're in crunch, managing it, organizing it, planning it to make sure that it doesn't come back to bite you and create more crunch. Completely, 100%. Like there's no way around that. Like ultimately the games are best made by people from different perspectives, different outlook, different understandings. There's a reason that Nintendo specifically seeks to hire people from outside the games industry, because they bring into it the ideas and thoughts and processes that you just aren't going to find with people whose interests are only games. So it's important to have a diverse workforce, because people are going to just bring their own perspective, and ultimately you're also you are creating a workforce or an industry in that sense that understands each other, that is creative, that wants to work with each other, that brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, and it's reflective of the people who are going to play games, because you don't know who is the person that's going to be playing your game at the other end, and what you want is a game that is reflective of them, that they can empathize with. So ultimately, yes, absolutely 100% a diverse workforce is important. It's a really interesting way of doing things, because ultimately we are always working on a number of projects. We're never just locked down to one individual game. We're always working on a few bits pieces, our own stuff, other people's stuff. It does make it sort of more focused, in so much as that we can't focus on one thing. We have to focus on finding work, getting work, doing that work. It's sort of, we're pulled about a bit, but by the same token, it also is more stable. We get paid more because we are doing other people's work. We're not relying on finding funding, finding publishers, waiting until the game comes out. We are almost totally reliant on contract work, which means that we're more stable. I love working with freelancers. They're people who are highly skilled individuals who make their name in jumping from project to project, who bring with them just a wealth of knowledge and skill and ability that you're just not going to find in any other scenario. When you're working on just a section of a game, it means you have to think more about what's involved in the rest of the game. So you'll focus less on these overarching powerful systems that are going to connect everybody up and make the life easy for the player. You are essentially working on your tiny section, and what's important about that is that you have to think about, okay, how do I plug that into the rest of it? Imagine like a piece of furniture that's moving into the room. The room already exists. You've got to think about the color your furniture is going to be. How does it look? How does it fit? How do you make it so that it fits what's already there? You have the freedom within that, and obviously you have freedom within those systems to build something that works for you and works in the way that you're going to work. And depending on how strict the specification is in terms of what you're going to make, you have the freedom to make something that's going to work. But it does have to fit in with everything else, and that's important. So you're best off sort of looking around at how have they done it, how has it been done before, how in this project does it already work, and trying to stick to that as sort of your yardstick for how you should conduct yourself and create work. So my favorite game is actually one I played last year. So I played a game called The Outer Wilds, which is a game about you as a player in sort of a handcrafted galaxy, exploring and searching and trying to find the answers to sort of a problem. I won't say much more than that, because anything more than that will spoil most of the game. But basically, it's this wonderful piece of narrative with very little narrative that's just allowing you to explore and discover for yourself. It's very good at being pure discovery. So definitely something that I'd recommend investigating. Everything. Anything that's non-games can inspire you to make games. When games becomes your creative outlet, when you're able to build worlds and design things in a gaming space, it becomes easy
to be inspired by other things, you know, and that can range from other types of media. So, you know, watch a film and be, you know, you can watch Inception and be inspired to create something with time involved. You could watch the Jungle Book and be inspired to make a jungle-based game, or something about growing up in the jungle or something like that. Very easy to be inspired by other media, but also I get inspired a lot by, you know, walking around, you know, looking at a stream and a river, and the games that we play. Just something like when you throw the sticks over the bridge and race to the other side, you know, that could be interesting in VR. Or looking at paintings, looking at listening to pieces of music, going out and seeing stuff and looking at architecture. Non-gaming media almost entirely can inspire any kind of game, because games can be whatever you want. And definitely I think it's important to have those inspirations to go out and you know, expand your horizons and learn about different things, because you never know when it's going to become relevant and someone's going to ask your opinion and you go, actually, you know what, and think about and remember something that you've seen. Thank you very much.